Hello and welcome to this week's episode. As you can see, I'm in an appropriate location for the subject. Now, during this episode, there are going to be lots of references of right and left, and I know that there are people who have difficulty distinguishing between right and left, and so here is a useful tip for you. If you hold out your hands like that, your right hand is the one with the thumb on the left. Hope that helps. If you enjoy this episode, please click the like and subscribe buttons and please share it with anybody really. Okay, let's get started. Many times over the years, people have asked me, why is it that people drive on the left in Britain? Personally, I find this question very strange for a variety of reasons. First of all, a lot of people imagine that only Britain drives on the left, especially in Europe. Even in Europe, there are a variety of countries which drive on the left. And if you look at the whole world, you'll find that there are 68 countries which drive on the left. Some of these countries are very small, like Malta or Kiribati. Others are pretty big, like India, Japan, Indonesia, Australia, and many more. It's estimated that 30% of the world's cars drive on the left. Here you can see them. I find this question strange because it implies that driving on the left is somehow unusual. Apart from the large number of countries that drive on the left, it is not an aberration. In fact, the ancient convention in just about every civilization in the world was to travel on the left and not on the right. To be honest, I drive regularly both on the left and on the right, and I don't really think it's a big issue. So, for example, here I am in the car on the right, or with the right hand steering wheel, and here I am with the car on the left. Doesn't really make any difference. Certainly driving in the UK and in Italy does have a lot of contrast, but it's nothing to do with whether you're on the left or the right. Archaeology has suggested that the Romans used to ride their horses, carts and chariots on the left. And historical evidence suggests that most ancient civilizations had the convention of travelling on the left, especially within cities. When looking at the history, it's probably better to talk about travelling on the left rather than driving, because travelling for most people meant walking. Only the rich rode, whether it was chariots, carts or horses. As I said, when they travelled, the vast majority of people in most civilizations throughout human history had the convention, rules, laws, whatever, that people should keep to the left. Passenger coaches in the 1700s used trumpets to signal to oncoming traffic which side of the road they wanted to pass. But this was an exception. Roads were so bad that drivers of fast-moving coaches chose the side of the road with fewer potholes. Sound familiar? Naturally, in rural areas, traffic was not so dense. This was more of a convention than a rule. But in the cities, the rule was extremely important to avoid traffic jams or even gridlock. Cities in most ancient civilizations observed these rules, the Roman Empire included. So, travelling on the left-hand side of the road was the norm. But why did they choose the left? One theory is that travelling was dangerous and that most people were right-handed and they were able to draw a sword, or more likely a knife, to deal with any hostile person coming the other way. There might be some truth in that, but I think another factor is also important. Some time ago I made a video on why people board planes from the left-hand side. I'll put a link in the description. In that video I pointed out that people mounted horses on the left side of the horse using their right hands. If your horse is parked on the left-hand side of the road, I'm not sure parked is the right word for horses, it's safer to mount from the left because you're not in the middle of the road. If the rule had been right-hand side travel, then the rider would have been forced to mount the horse in the middle of the road. The reality was that most people didn't travel very far anyway, and so outside cities the roads were pretty empty, as I've already said. It was quite normal in many countries that in the country roads people could choose which side to pass on, but once they got into the cities they had to
keep to what was normally the left. With the coming of the railways, which massively increased travel, the convention was immediately followed that railways should keep to the left. So in other words, the train going one way would be on the left-hand side when there were two tracks. And this is true in most parts of the world. Trains generally travel on the left-hand side, even in countries where on the roads they travel on the right. There were times when there were special occasions in which for a special reason, a specific rule would be created, and it would probably continue after that. Here is an example which will be described by my assistant, Ambra. Over to you, Ambra.
Thanks, Bruce. Pope Boniface VIII invented traffic control when, in 1300, he apparently declared that all pilgrims traveling to Rome for the first Jubilee should keep to the left, as was the norm. It was good thinking because there might have been as many as 200,000 of them, scope for some pretty nasty jams.
Thanks, Amber. So, why did most of the world change? Well, before the French Revolution, in France, aristocrats travelled on the left side of the road, forcing their social inferiors over to the right. Afterwards, with the mass execution of aristocrats, they thought it safer to keep a low profile and joined the lower orders, the peasants, on the right. This then became common practice in revolutionary France. And although driving on the right didn't become fully law in France until the 1920s, when road traffic became much more dense. When Napoleon started his invasions of his neighbours, his government not only stole just about everything that wasn't nailed down, they also imposed Napoleonic law, the metric system, and travelling on the right on most of Europe. By the way, don't have any illusions about Napoleon. He was every bit as brutal as Hitler, Stalin, Mao Zedong, Saddam Hussein, Putin, and countless other monsters who have deliberately set out to create as much human misery as possible. In the 19th century, the colonies of France and the colonies of the countries that it imposed its systems on, including travelling on the right, forced the people of these colonies to travel on the right. And on independence, these countries continued to travel on the right. The colonies of Britain were forced to travel on the left, and consequently, on their independence, they continued to travel on the left, with the exception of Canada, but I'll come to Canada later. Japan and Thailand, ex-Siam, were never colonized, so continued to follow the ancient left-hand side rule. So what about the USA and Canada? Well, in the early years of colonization in North America, the English driving customs were followed and people kept to the left. However, after gaining independence from England or the United Kingdom in 1776, the former colonists were determined to cast off all links, with Pennsylvania first turning to the right in 1792. Another factor was that grain wagons were massive in the New World and needed to be pulled by large teams of horses. The driver sat on the left rear horse so he could keep his right arm free to whip the other horses. Since he was perched on the left, he wanted the oncoming wagons to pass on the same side so he could look down and make sure that he stayed clear of their wheels. That meant keeping his wagon on the right-hand side of the road. So this was another factor. If you add to that the fact that in the latter parts of the Napoleonic Wars, the United States entered on the side of France, and this probably had an influence in reinforcing this tendency. As Canada had such a long border with the USA on independence, it made sense to apply the same rules there.
There are people who claim that driving on the left is actually safer. The argument goes something like this. Most humans are right-handed, and this means that the right hand and the right arm are stronger and is also faster in reaction time. This means that when you keep your right hand on the steering wheel here, you can deal with any sudden changes in the situation very quickly. Also, right-handed people are generally right-eyed, and the right eye is closer to the centre of the road, and so in a situation like traffic, motorways, etc., where a decision made in a fraction of a second is crucial, this could be important. Also, people who are right-handed are generally right-footed as well. So in other words, your right foot controls the accelerator and the brake. Again, the things that need a faster reaction time than the clutch, which is only used for changing gear. And of course, if it's an automatic car, you don't even have that third pedal. They also point out that even cars designed to drive on the right have the same pedal arrangement as cars that drive on the left. It's not that, okay, you change over the steering arrangements, you steer with a different hand and you change gear with a different hand, but on either type of car, you use your right foot for the accelerator and the brake and the left foot for the clutch. Though this may support the argument.
I think it would be great for some serious research to be done on this subject, but it's more complex than that. It's not enough just to compare countries. For example, you could compare Italy and the UK for road safety because they are both developed countries with similar population sizes. If you just compare straight numbers, you'll see that the average number of deaths per year over recent years in Italy has been about 2,800 per year, while the UK is about 1,500. And at first glance, this would imply that driving on the left is safer. But in reality, there are many other reasons for different death tolls. And there are some countries that drive on the left, like India, which are extremely dangerous to drive in. Personally, I don't believe this research will ever take place because think of the consequences if it was proved that driving on one side or the other was radically safer. Governments might be forced to take action, and changing the side of the road the entire country drives on in the modern world would be horrendously expensive. So it's not going to happen.
I don't think any serious research will ever be done. There are too many vested interests in maintaining the status quo. In the past, countries have changed the side of the road they drive on, but these countries have either been countries with a very low traffic density, or it's happened a long time ago. And so I don't think there'll be any change. All we can do is drive carefully. Don't forget, these things are dangerous, not just for you, but for everyone around you. Okay?